national lockdown.
You can spend time outdoors and exercise as often as you like, and you can meet one person outside your household in an outdoor public place, provided that you stay 2 metres apart.
Well, the chair of the Conservative Party, Oliver Dowden, joins me this morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming in to talk to us. 9 minutes after you finished that press conference, telling the nation what the rules were, there was a gathering just a few hundred metres away from you in the garden at Downing Street, around 40 people bringing their own booze to enjoy the lovely weather. Did you know about it? What did you see?
No, I didn't know about the event. As you might imagine, as Culture Secretary, I went to speak in this press conference. Actually, the press conference was about steps we're taking to support the creative industries and the creation of this task force, which, by the way, led to the £1.5 billion Cultural Recovery Fund, which saved many businesses up and down the country. I then also set out what the rules were pertaining at the time, and I think, as you've seen previously, that was stage one. And the moment I'd finished the press conference, I left, got in my car, went home and had dinner with my family.
But that was a Wednesday afternoon. It was beautiful weather that day. Around 100 people had been invited to drinks in the Downing Street garden by email, a pre-planned event. Did you sense any sort of party atmosphere then?
No, I think it's actually quite important for you, and more importantly your viewers, to understand how Downing Street is. Downing Street is not just the Prime Minister's home. Of course, he has a flat above the shop, as everyone's familiar with. But also, it's an office with many hundreds of people in it, and it's segmented into different parts. I was in the formal front-facing part of the building, went upstairs, and I had an appropriate briefing beforehand, did the press conference, and I left.
But did you see, I mean, there were about 30, 40 people gathering 9 minutes after you finished that. You would have been leaving at the same time as they were arriving. I mean, did you see people going outside? Did you sense any of what was going to go on?
No, I didn't, Sophie, but this is precisely why it's important that there is a full investigation into all of the facts, and that's why the Prime Minister set this up. But I would also say, and I completely appreciate your underlying point on all of this, this event was totally wrong. It shouldn't have happened. The Prime Minister has rightly apologised for it. People feel angry about what's been going on in Downing Street. I feel angry about what's going on in Downing Street. But the correct process now is to get to the full facts and then for the Prime Minister to appear before Parliament, which he will do, and to be held to account. But I can assure you the Prime Minister is both very contrite and deeply apologetic for what happened, but also, more importantly, is determined to make sure that this can't be allowed to happen, and that we address the underlying culture in Downing Street.
Deeply apologetic, but in the Commons he said that he thought that it technically fell within the guidance. You'd just been telling us what the guidance was, and that was that you could only meet one person outside, socially distanced. You had around 40 in the Downing Street garden.
Yes, these events really should not have happened. There's absolutely no doubt about that, but it's important that we have a proper process to get to the bottom of all the facts. And I would say, in respect of what the Prime Minister's position, you heard what he said in Parliament, and that's been reinforced by subsequent conversations I've had with him. He is very much apologetic for this happening. It shouldn't have happened. The task for us now is to make sure that we address the underlying culture in Downing Street, and I know that the Prime Minister is completely committed to doing that. But
this word technically fell within the guidance. If somebody, one of the members of the public, had asked you at that press conference whether they could that afternoon, at the height, this was the height of lockdown, we'd all been locked down for weeks at that point. If a member of the public had asked you in that press conference whether they could go and meet their colleagues outside in the office where they were working and have a drink, would you have said, yes, that technically is within the guidance?
Well, I set out the position on stage one, and the Prime Minister has accepted this point. If you look at what the Prime Minister said, he said, and I won't repeat his exact words, but he said that he should have just walked straight back in. He should have ended the gathering. Nobody is disputing that point, Sophie. And I also, though, really appreciate the enormous sacrifices, the terrible things people have had to do in this country over the past 2 years to control this virus. I don't for a moment underestimate people's anger about this. I share that anger, but we must, and I hope your viewers would appreciate that the appropriate thing for us to do is to look at the whole array of different allegations, and Chris Mason was talking about some of those just now, establish the full facts of those, and then allow the Prime Minister to come to Parliament and to explain his response to it fully, which I know he will, and I also know that the Prime Minister is committed to addressing the underlying culture there as well.
It's the chasm, it's the disconnect, isn't it, between the email that is inviting people, it's sent out to people in Downing Street, come and enjoy the lovely weather, have some socially distanced drinks in the number 10 garden. It is the disconnect with that email and what you had just been telling people to do. People who at that point in time couldn't see their loved ones, couldn't see their families, couldn't see their parents. There were people in hospital who were dying on their own. It is the disconnect between what is going on inside number 10 and what was happening to the vast majority of the nation.
And I completely agree with you. And it's unacceptable. And the Prime Minister has made that very clear in what he said in Parliament. And I know that the Prime Minister, when he responds in full to the Sue Gray report, and it's right, by the way, he's held accountable to Parliament for that, will be addressing that further. There's no difference in terms of my feeling of anger, your viewers' feeling of anger at this happening.
But how can
we share this, and it needs to be addressed.
Have thought that technically fell within the guidelines?
Well, he will go into further detail on that when he responds to the Sue Gray report. The Sue Gray report will set out the facts, and it's worth understanding what the purpose of this report is to have a full explanation of the facts, and then to see how those sit alongside the rules at the time.
We know what the rules were at the time.
Once both those things have happened, the Prime Minister will come to Parliament and be held to account for what happened.
But you had just told us what the rules were. Do you think that technically it could have fallen within the guidelines? Is there for you a grey area there?
Well, and I don't want to sort of be cliched about this, and I do completely accept the underlying point that this thing should never have happened. But we have set up a process for how we determine the exact facts and how those sit alongside the rules, and then the Prime Minister will respond to that properly.
We've seen, and Chris Mason has just made it very clear, the number of parties, the number of events that were going on. You were a cabinet minister, you were there, you presumably were in and out of Downing Street. Did you know that kind of thing was going on?
No, I didn't know that kind of thing was going on.
You had no idea about the socialising that was going on in number 10?
No, I didn't have any idea about it. And I think it's important to understand what I and other cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister were doing at the time. We were dealing with this unprecedented global pandemic. We were working on plans for a vaccine rollout. We've had the most rapid vaccine rollout in Europe twice. That's enabled us to have one of the most open economies in Europe. It's enabled us to get the economy back to where it was before the pandemic, unemployment down. That is where our focus was, day in, day out. And I can say to you, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
There was the 2 leaving dues in Downing Street. That is an incredibly stark contrast, isn't it, between what the Queen was doing the day after and the night before. The flags are at half-mast in Downing Street. There are parties, leaving dues going on, drinking, dancing. When did you find out about that?
Well, I found out about it when I read it in the newspapers, and we all saw the dignity and the humility and the sacrifice made by Her Majesty the Queen, as she's shown throughout her entire reign. And I was as disgusted as everyone else that this could have been happening the night before.
What does it say about the culture in Downing Street?
Well, it says to me that the culture in Downing Street does need to be addressed. And I think it's absolutely essential that when the Prime Minister responds to the Sue Gray report, and he is committed to doing that in Parliament, that he addresses that culture. And I know that the Prime Minister is committed to doing exactly this. There were failings. We should have done better, much, much better. We need to up our game, and that needs to be addressed. And I know the Prime Ministers are committed to addressing that.
Who leads the culture in Downing Street? Is the Prime Minister not ultimately responsible for the culture there, for what goes on there?
Yes, the Prime Minister is responsible for it. And I think you saw in his statement to Parliament him taking responsibility for it. And I think you'll see that when he responds to the Sue Gray report, he will again take full responsibility for it. I know from many conversations I've had with the Prime Minister, he's in absolutely no doubt that he should and will take responsibility. And I think you'll see that in the statement that he makes to the House of Commons when this report is produced.
You have come on here to defend the Prime Minister today. Have you spoken to him? Have you asked him for assurances that there will be no more revelations, no more photographs, no more emails?
Well, that's precisely why we have set up this Sue Gray process,
But have you asked him? Did you speak to the Prime Minister before coming on today? Have you got any assurances that that is it?
Well, of course, I speak to the Prime Minister all the time, including before this, and to the best of mine and the government's knowledge that this is the full extent of it. But we
so
can't
he has said to you, he has said to you, that is it.
Look,
there is no more.
This is precisely why we set up this Sue Gray process, because if there are further allegations to come out,
and
all of them have to be brought to the fore. And that's why, if you look at the terms of reference when the PM announced it, and as he said subsequently, he is now allowing everyone to bring forward any further concerns they have. Sue Gray will get to the bottom of all of that so we can see those full facts. And that's why we set it up in that way.
But Sue Gray, I mean, her report, we're expecting to get it next week. But, I mean, the Prime Minister is her boss. The Prime Minister has set out the terms of her inquiry, and she cannot be the one to say whether or not he broke the ministerial code. It's just a fact-finding mission, isn't it?
Well, it has two elements, in fact, three elements to it. The first is to find the full facts, and it really is important that we find the full facts. There's lots of different allegations going around. We have to get to the bottom of it, not just what's happened, but other opportunities for other people to come forward. Secondly, she will set it out alongside the rules at the time. And thirdly, she will advise on disciplinary action. But of course, in terms of the Prime Minister's conduct and the conduct of the government as a whole, he is accountable to Parliament. We as government ministers are accountable to Parliament. So the crucial part of this is that then in response to the Sue Gray report, the Prime Minister will come before Parliament, make a statement. He will be held to account by the Leader of the Opposition, by members of Parliament from all sides. And I am confident that when he does that, he will accept responsibility, and he will also set out steps as to how we improve the culture of what happened in Downing Street.
There is a lot of anger about this, not least in your own party. Tim Lawton is the latest MP to call for the Prime Minister to go. Are you expecting more?
Well, that's up to individual members of Parliament. I don't think the Prime Minister should go, and I'll tell you why I don't think the Prime Minister should go. I think actually, and I think this was touched on in your paper review at the beginning, I saw a little of it. If you look at where we are, for example, with the Omicron variant, we appear to be coming out of the worst of it. Why? Because we've had this vaccine rollout, this booster. That has been driven by the Prime Minister. We've got the economy in a strong position. Why? Because the Prime Minister took the decision to keep the economy open over the Christmas period in the face of many others calling for something different to be done. In terms of those really big judgment calls, he has got them right. Now, I don't diminish for a second people's anger and frustration and hurt at what has happened, and that has to be addressed. But we also need to look at how, as we come out of Omicron, we move beyond this and deal with the challenge of it, whether that's the NHS backlog or whether that is rebuilding the economy. So that's where the focus of the government needs to be.
The Prime Minister stays in position, the Prime Minister fights the next general election. What happens in Scotland when the next general election comes around, where almost every single Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament has called for him to resign?
Well, I have a great deal of respect for Douglas Ross, but I simply disagree with the position that he set out there.
You have a great deal of respect for him, but Jacob Rees-Mogg called him a lightweight politician.
Well, it's up to Jacob Rees-Mogg the words he chooses. I, like Jacob, disagree with what Douglas Ross said, but I wouldn't have chosen those words myself.
What do people say on the doorstep in Scotland then? All those Conservative MSPs calling for the Prime Minister to resign. How do you go into another general election with the Prime Minister at the helm?
Well, I accept people's anger and frustration and hurt at these allegations. I think the way we deal with it is to make sure we establish the full facts and that the Prime Minister responds appropriately, and I know he's committed to doing so, and that we also then make sure that as we come out of this Omicron variant, as we come out, thankfully all the indicators seem to be moving in the right direction on COVID, we deal with the profound consequence of COVID. And I think that people are looking for that kind of leadership, and indeed I would say the kind of leadership we've seen before in dealing with the crisis in the first place.
Are all restrictions going to be lifted on COVID on the 26th of January in England?
Well, I would very much hope so. It's always been the intention that when we introduce Plan B, we would have it for the minimum period possible. Clearly, we have this review point. The indications are that everything's moving in the right direction, but we'll make that judgment at the point of the final decision, and that will be announced in the proper way.
Oliver Dowden, thank you very much for joining me this morning.